All right, guys, so I am going to go over your notes for this week. So, we have been talking about heredity, we have been talking about variations, and all of those good things. So, I want to go deeper into it, okay? So, what that means is inherited traits. So, your essential questions for this week: what are inherited traits? How are traits governed by the genetic material found in the genes within chromosomes in the cell's nucleus? So, have you ever wondered how you look, like why, not how, I'm sorry. Have you ever wondered why you look like you look? Have you ever wondered why you may look more like your mom versus your dad, or maybe more like your mom's side of the family versus your dad's side of the family? Well, these things are called inherited traits. So let's just talk about heredity. So in your vocab this week, you had some of these words. So I'm just going to go through them very quickly because you should have already did your vocab before you started doing this. So you should already have a good understanding of what these things are. So heredity. Heredity is a transfer of traits from one generation to another generation. So it's basically what you get from your daddies and your parents, their parents' parents, and their parents' parents, okay? Let's talk about who actually figured this out for us. His name was Gregor Mendel, and Gregor Mendel is known as the father of modern genetics. So if you ever go and study genetics, you're going to be basically studying his findings. So he was born in 1822, and he was a monk in Austria. Mendel discovered the basic principles of heredity through experiments with pea plants. So what he did was he found a characteristic or feature of one organism that are inherited, passed down from parents to the offspring. So he studied in humans, you have things like freckles, eye hair color, dimples. Those things are all inherited, right? In animals, you have things like eye, hair color, hair texture, face shape. And in plants, they have things like leaf shape, plant height, flower color. And these were all things that Gregor Mendel actually studied. He actually was really famous for studying the peas, and we'll talk about it pretty soon. But before we go into his studies and more on that, let's actually talk about dominant traits versus recessive traits. So a dominant trait is a trait that hides other traits when passed on to offsprings. So for instance, if you have if there is if you are coloring with a black Sharpie, right, and you have white paper or something like that, of course, it's going to bleed through any other color that you may have. Say, for instance, you put yellow on there first, or before you started coloring with the black is going to go over the yellow, and that's because it is a dominant trait. So that's an example of it. So it shows a specific trait, even only one parent passed the gene to the kid. When a child inherits dominant traits, such as brown hair genes from their dad, the child will have brown hair because the dad's traits are more dominant than the mother's traits. Now let's talk about something called recessive. So a recessive trait are those hidden traits by those dominant traits. So it's like the yellow, going back to our yellow over the black color. So this shows that it's a specific trait when both parents pass the genes to the child. So when a child inherits recessive blue eyes, that gene from both mom and dad, then the child will have blue eyes. So usually recessive traits only happens when both parents has those recessive genes. And I know that sounds like craziness right now, but we're going to go over it a little later. And actually in 2 weeks, when we talk about Punnett squares, you're going to be able to really see this, okay? So here's an example. You see a parent right here has blue eyes. This parent has blue eyes. So then 99% of the time that child is going to have blue eyes. It's going to be a 1% chance that they have green eyes. The same for here. It'll be a 50-50. Here it'll be a 75-25, and so forth and so on. How are traits actually passed down? So when organisms reproduce, traits are passed from the parent to the actual offspring. It all begins with the organism's cells. And we know that cells are the basic building blocks for all living things. And we know that cells contains the body's hereditary material and can make copies of themselves. So we'll talk more about them making copies of cells when we talk about mitosis and meiosis. But yeah, just understand that cells do make copies of themselves, and that's why when you cut yourself, your skin grows back. That's the cell copying itself. So remember this nucleus. We talked about this when we were going over organelles, right? We know that a nucleus is an organelle inside of a cell. It's a small egg-shaped structure inside of the cell. It acts like the brain. It tells everything what to do, and it contains the chromosomes and genes. It also stores cells, heredity, material, or DNA. That's the new part right here. So we talked about what the nucleus actually does, but we never said what it stores. So here's the new part. It stores cell, heredity, material, or also known as your DNA. Okay, so that's important to remember. Now let's talk about chromosomes. So remember when we said, when we were studying organisms and organ systems, we said that cells makes up tissue, tissue makes up organs, organs makes up organ systems, and organ systems make up organisms. That's the same with hereditary information. So nucleus, inside of a nucleus, you have DNA. In DNA, inside of DNA, you have chromosomes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But chromosomes, once again, you should have did this in your vocabulary. There are thread-like structures that are found in the nucleus of a cell that contains all DNA. Each chromosome is made of protein and a single molecule of DNA. It comes in matching sets of 2. So in your body, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which makes you end up having 46, okay? Half of these chromosomes come from one parent, so half of them come from your mom, the other half come from your dad. That's how you get both of their information inside, genetic information inside of you. Now let's talk about DNA. So DNA is a molecule that carries the genetic instructions for all living things. So the DNA is basically like the control center, right? So it actually tells them everything that they need to do. And it's short for deoxyribonucleic acid. And it contains the specific instructions that make each type of living creature unique. And it also determines how the cells in the body will function. Now let's talk about a gene. So once again, this was another vocabulary word. A gene determines your actual traits, okay? So you have your genes that makes up your DNA. A whole lot of DNA makes up your chromosomes. A whole lot of chromosomes makes up your nucleus. Say it all together for me. Genes makes up DNA. DNA makes up chromosomes. Chromosomes makes up nucleus, okay? So genes determine traits. A stretch of DNA on a chromosome with instructions for one trait. Like a chromosome, genes also come in pairs, okay? So each parent has 2 copies of each of their genes. Each parent passes along just one copy to make up the genes of the offspring. So they come in pairs like Twix, right? You think of Twix, right? So just like chromosomes have pairs like a Twix bar, so does your genes. So you get one of those from your parent, from one parent, you give the other one from the other parent. And the genes are actually what tells, what decides what you'll look like. So here is a picture of it all together again. Cells contain the nucleus contains the chromosomes contains the DNA contains the gene. And I want you to understand that the cell is the largest thing and the DNA is the smallest thing, right? Or the gene is the smallest thing, okay? So you're getting from the cell is the largest to the gene being the smallest. Now let's talk about something called acquired traits. So you have physical characteristics of an organism that are not passed down to offsprings genetically. It's a learned trait. It's a product of your environment's influence on the organism. So basically, you learn how to do this. Just like you learn how to ride your bike, you learn, dogs learn how to shape humans' hands, those kind of things. You didn't get those because of your genetics. You got those because you learned those. So that's all I got for you guys. Are you able to recognize what inherited traits are now? Explain how genetic material found in genes governs inherited traits. So tomorrow you have to tell me that you really understand all of this. And the way you do that, you'll get to choose from 3 different things. Go take a look at it. If you have any questions, come let me know. Have a good day, guys.